Thank you everybody for coming this morning and joining us for our latest CPD Live with Julia Crocker. Julia, this is helping to talk through the Tutor's Guide to Supporting Students and Parents through the exam year. So Julia, over to you.
Sorry, my headphones were cutting out and I realised it had to be there and I could only hear half what you're saying. That was not a good start. Morning everyone, thank you obviously for joining. I can see a few faces I recognise. I obviously can't see actually half of who's in here and I'm a bit nervous about touching too many things because it could all go horribly wrong. So I'm not going to look at who's here, but if I know you, hello. If I don't know you, welcome, and it's really nice to meet you. We'll just get going. I will tell you a little bit about myself. Okay, so I have been in education now for 32 years, which really makes me feel quite old. I'd like to say about 5 or 6, but you know, I'm definitely going down that scale. So I've been really fortunate. I've worked in the most amazing schools, and I know not everyone has that experience, and I feel very fortunate for that. I'm really grateful that I've been so lucky. I've worked in amazing schools, both secondary and primary. I've worked in the UK and Thailand, so I've had quite a varied career. I've also been higher. I also have had I've been in primary and secondary. I started in primary, so I've taught everything from pre-nursery up to sixth form. So I've done a bit of everything. My preference is actually GCSE maths. My degree is maths, so that is my background. You can see obviously on the screen that I've been deputy head of primary, I've been secondary head of maths, I've been a head of house in boarding school, which was a residential position, and I was also the maths teacher trainer for a skit, which meant I led all the training for the maths teachers, which was, you know, an amazing experience. I've now been a full-time independent tutor since 2022, and as much as I had an amazing time in all the schools I was in, I was very lucky. This now for me has been fantastic, both on a personal level and actually in terms of helping students. I think it's been an amazing kind of step on in my career and a way of changing my whole lifestyle. So it's going very, very well. I'm really pleased with how I'm getting on, and I'm now at the point where I'm starting to bring in other maths tutors. I've made that decision to kind of go down that route. I was very fortunate, I'm very proud to be awarded Professional Tutor of the Year last year by the awards. So obviously I thought I should put that in, even though it's not necessarily in my nature to put it in, but I feel like I should. If you have applied for the awards this year, they really are worth applying for, because it makes you reflect and it makes you think about actually what do you do well and how you support your students. It's not just about winning. I entered every year and I got shortlisted. I never thought I'd actually win, so winning was a bit of a shock, but it's so worth it from the reflection point of view, and I'd really recommend it every year. Just laughing at the emojis. Right, so I thought we'd just start with just a little bit about you, because obviously a lot of this is going to be me talking, me telling you things. It would be just really great to have a little idea of what exams you're working towards with your students. Maybe it's 11 plus or other school entry exams, GCSE, A-level, IB, something else. It might be university based, or it might not be any exams at this point. So maybe you just put that into the chat just so you can kind of see what's going on. So a bit of a mixture coming in, GCSE, A-level, other. Are you happy to share what it is, Jennifer, just out of interest, just to be nosy? Oh, I can't hear you, Jennifer, sorry. I think you're speaking, but you're muted. GCSE, A-level.
I do apologise. I had a lady phone me up from university, and she applied for a job and realised that she needed GCSE maths, but she'd got into university when she shouldn't have, because they didn't check the paperwork. So she's just sat, yes, it's a long story, an equivalency exam.
Right, yeah,
so we've been doing functional skills revision and stuff. So that finished. That finished yesterday. She passed, so I was really chuffed.
Yeah, amazing. That's good. Good for her as well. Good news. So there's quite a mix of, it looks like the majority of us are kind of the GCSE, A-level, 11 plus SATs, and obviously a few bits outside of that. Not that it matters. I personally think that preparing students for exams at whatever level there's similarities across the board, whatever subject, whatever level. Obviously, it's just going to be tweaks on how you do different things. Okay, so why is it not letting me move on? Let me try again. Ah, there you go. It was because I was in the chat, I think. Right, so I guess why am I passionate about this? I chose this as a topic. I chose that I think it's important to talk about supporting students and parents. And I think the key for me is it's about both. From a tutor perspective, I don't think it's just about the students. I think the more we work with the parents, the better. I'm passionate about this because I think it's easy to think about the exam year just in terms of what do they need to do for that bit of paper? What do they need to know? What practice of questions do they need? And just think about the content a lot of the time. But I think the exam year is much more complex. And I think having left school, I think it's more visible. Working as a tutor, working with families, working online with one-to-one or small groups, I think you start to see the bigger picture, which you might see in school depending on your role. And I appreciate not everyone's been in schools, but it is different once you start tutoring because you get more kind of personally involved on a one-to-one level. You start to see the little things that are causing the issues that you might not have spotted in a classroom situation. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of pressure on both students and parents, and I think we're really able to help with that. So that's why, for me, this is such an important topic. Okay, so the reality of exam year, I think we probably can all recognise the different people in that picture. You could have a parent, it could be a mum or dad, pulling their hair out, not knowing how to help. They could be very stressed by watching their child and how they can help them. They might be stressed about what's going on at the school. So it can be kind of both sides. You might have the child who has just given up, put their head down. You may have the child who is really enthusiastic and really motivated. You also have what I would think of as an emotional roller coaster through the year. There's ups and downs, there's positives and negatives. Emotions can be all over the place. Stress can be all over the place. Okay, so it can be a really big year for everyone involved. Okay, so students might be anxious, they might be overwhelmed, they could be disengaged. We're going to see them all. I'm sure everyone here can recognise a different student they will have seen during the exam preparation. I guess it's important actually, I'm saying exam year, I'm really kind of talking about that final year, but actually everything I'm talking about fits for all of the years leading towards an exam, and I think that's important. So that could start all the way back in year 7 on a very subtle level. It could start at the start of year 10, depending on you and who you're working with and what their kind of goal is. Okay, we can all recognise parents who want to help, don't know how, and I'm sure whether you've been in schools or not, you'll understand that different schools vary hugely in the way they support. I'm going to go into some of this in more detail. The different schools definitely make it easier for people or sometimes harder. I think from my experience, there's often a gap between what students and parents need and what they're getting. Okay, and I genuinely think this is where we fit in as tutors, and I think it's where we can make a real difference. We can really help them solve a lot of these problems and at least find ways through that journey to make it not feel as difficult. Okay, so we have a very unique and very privileged position. Okay, we have time, we can personalize the support. We're not tied to a curriculum in the way a school might be. Yes, if we're working towards GCSE or A-level or whichever exam, obviously there's things we need to look at. There's things we want to make sure the student can do, but we can work with the student, we can work at their pace. So I've got students where I've started with them in year 10 and realised that whilst they're wanting to talk about GCSE work, I've realised that they can't do their times tables, they can't do basic addition. And there's no point in us trying to do the GCSE questions if they can't do the basics behind it that they really need. So I often go back and do things that, you know, could be seen as a bit primary school and go back and say, come on, let's just really make these bits of your maths good to help you make the rest easier. And I think we can choose to do that. And so long as we do it in such a way that it doesn't feel babyish and it doesn't feel like we're saying you're rubbish, I think it's kind of making it into a bit of fun and kind of going, oh, do you remember when you used to know this and you've forgotten? You can kind of address it and make it positive, but you can go back as far as you need to go. Okay, I think we can also bridge those gaps. So often, and again, I'm sure everyone's experienced this, you have a student that will come in and say, well, I missed a lesson and they've done this. And in some subjects, that might just be a quick fix. And in maths, sometimes if they miss one lesson, they might have missed the lesson that allows them to access the next one and the next one. So suddenly, what could be just one lesson they've missed could actually make a really big difference overall. Okay, so it really could make a difference. For me, I think supporting both the student and parent makes a massive difference. I've worked with some families. I worked with one parent who started with me with her daughter. I am going to use different names in case there's any question about that. So any names I use aren't real, but I worked with a friend's daughter. Her name was Steph, and they started with me at the start of year 11, and her mum was like, we're in a complete stress. She's on predicted grade 1. She needs to get a grade 4. What can we do? The girl was completely disengaged with the idea of maths in school. She hated it. It was miserable. Family life was miserable, actually. And what happened was, I was very honest, obviously, with the parent, and just said, look, I'm happy to help you, but I can't guarantee that I can get her to that 4. From a 1 to a 4 in year 11, that's quite a big deal. And what happened was we started working, and at the beginning, Steph was very reluctant. Steph was very unsure. She was very much, I don't think I can do it. And we just kind of chipped away, and we did a lot of positivity and just telling her she could do it. And suddenly she got to the point where she was starting to achieve some things in school. So suddenly her grades were going up a little bit. She still might not have been at that 4 at that point, but suddenly things improved. And the reason I mention that now is because one of their family friends came up to me. I saw her at somewhere outside, and she just came over to me out of the blue and said, look, Julia, I just want to talk to you, because it's not my place to say this, but I can't tell you how much of a difference you've made to family life for them, because Steph is now more confident. She feels happier. So everything at home has improved because of you doing maths with her. And I was blown away, because in a school environment, nobody can really pinpoint something like that. And suddenly to have this, not a stranger, but it wasn't her place to talk to me about it, but she felt so passionately about what she was seeing with the family. She wanted me to know. And I was lucky that she could tell me that. All of us are going to have that impact on people, but we might not all know it. And I think the reason I mention it is because each one of us will have had something like that, where we've made such a difference to a child and a family. And while I mentioned Steph, she did actually get the 4, which was quite incredible. And basically it was down to her, because she could do it in the first place, but she hadn't found that she could do it. I helped her to kind of unpack the way into it, but it was literally her that made it happen. So obviously that was an amazing outcome. I feel quite grateful that it worked that way, because it was nice, but it was more the impact on the family and how much of a difference her confidence and her improving in math could make on family life at home, normal family life, not school life, not academic conversations, just things like sitting around the table and things. I am vaguely looking at the chat. I'm conscious there's comments coming in, but I'm not going to go into them at this point. I will look at the end, and if there's anything, obviously, we can go off and talk about, I will do that. I'm conscious if I go into the chat, I may lose where I've also got to. So whilst I'm saying we're really privileged and we've got this opportunity to kind of, do things quite differently, the one thing I'm really strong on, and again, these are my opinions, so not everyone's going to agree with me on this. I think professional boundaries as a tutor are crucial. And I think for me personally, for the majority of families, school should always be the first point of contact. Now, obviously, if someone's home educating or if there's a real problem, that might be different. But I think we should never undermine school decisions. Okay. So if I have a student and their school is saying that they're doing, I don't know, the foundation paper, and I think they should be doing higher, or they're doing the higher paper and I think they should be doing foundation, which is possibly more likely. Thanks, Arthur. I will never openly say to a parent, I disagree. I might find ways to talk it through and make suggestions, but I will never, ever say the school is wrong. I will never say the teacher is wrong. And I will never say they should tell the school they're wrong. It doesn't mean I agree with every decision schools make, and I want to be clear on that, but I think it's really important that we find ways, if we don't agree with things that are happening at school, I think it's important to find ways to address that with the parent in such a way that you're supporting and helping them find a way, rather than saying, oh, that's wrong. Because what people see in school and what we see at home in a tutoring situation are different. A child in school, in a class or in an exam situation, could perform very differently than us with one-to-one. There's many reasons for that to be the case. And I think we just need to be very careful and very mindful of working with the school, basically, and working with the family to help make things better. I'm going to talk about that a bit more later, because I'm going to talk about how we can help parents in those situations where possibly internally we don't agree with the schools, but at the same time not actually saying it. Okay, and I think it's important we're careful with the language you use. I think we need to be very careful about making promises. Like, I never guarantee anything, even with the best wish. We can't guarantee we can make a difference. We can't guarantee we're right. And don't make any assumptions, because we don't see what's going on in school. We don't see the child in the exam room. We don't see how they perform under pressure, because some students, as we all know, fall apart when they hit an exam. So they might be fantastic at the subject, but can't perform. And I think we just need to be very careful with all of those things. I do think it's important to know our exam boards and specifications. And if I'm honest, to be honest with yourself about what you do or don't know. So I know there's some things I'm much more confident to offer advice on than others. And I will be very wary to offer advice on something that I'm not 100% sure on. I'll be cautious how I word things, and I might be looking to other people for advice. I might speak to other tutors I know. I might speak to teachers I know and say, actually, what would you do in this situation, before I give any advice? And I do think strongly, and again, this is my opinion, I don't think it's our role as tutors to make predictions or to give mock grades. Now, clearly, there might be some situations where that has to happen because of, it might be out of school, or there might be something that needs it. But on a general day-to-day basis, I don't think it's our role. I think we can support. Well, I have one parent that regularly asks me whether their child is going to get a 5. The school is saying they're going to get a 4. In my sessions, that child is working at a 5. But whenever they do an assessment, they're not getting a 5. So despite me seeing the child working at a 5, I don't think it's my place to say to the parent, yeah, they're going to get a 5. What I actually say is, they're working with me at a grade 5. Clearly, when I'm sitting next to them, they can do work at a grade 5. However, at the moment, they're not performing in school at a grade 5. They're not showing it in assessments. So what we need to do is look at how I can help them to try and get to the point where they can perform at that level. Okay. I don't think I should encourage the parent to believe the school is wrong on the predictions or mocks. I think it's more, we need to look at why they're different. Okay. And I've put on their guide, don't override. And I just think it's important. We can help parents a lot, but just keep those professional boundaries and really don't undermine schools, even if internally you think they're wrong, which it does happen. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. Just think about how you kind of communicate that. Okay, so I do think the exam year is a journey. And obviously this could be from year 7, it could be from year 9, it could be from year 10, but let's imagine it's just year 11. And I think it's a really important journey. And I think I talk to students about it being that journey. And I sometimes show them this picture, and I show them the fact that if they leave everything until the end where the goal is, they've left it too late. It's all going to go wrong. So I remind them right at the very beginning, I talk about those early habits. And so for me, I like to encourage them to do maybe, I don't know, 5-10 minutes maths a day. It doesn't have to be much. Little bits of revision, trying to make sure if their children, like some students love making revision cards and things like that, start them from the beginning. Don't leave it all to the end. Yeah, Claire, write stuff down. How many of them sit and listen to you or listen to lessons and don't write anything down? When I was in school, I was the teacher that would stand at the front and say, write this down. And they'd all look at me and I'd say, no, I'm serious, write it down. Write down the instruction, write down the steps. Because then when you're at home in 3 weeks' time trying to revise for an assessment and you can't remember what we did to get there, you can look back at what we've written down. So thanks for writing that, Claire. That was helpful. And I think we can basically go through that journey. The other thing I do at the beginning with some students, not all, those students when you can tell they're not necessarily engaged or motivated with the idea of the exams, I kind of talk to them about the why. What is their why? Why do they need to get that exam? Obviously with maths, it's like, what do you need maths for? What's your next steps? And with maths and English, often they have to get maths and English to go on to the school or sixth form or college. So I think it's important to have that reminder. And I think sometimes for those students that don't know what they're doing, I think it's, if you say to them, well, why do you need it? Even if it is just, well, I want to go to college because I want to study something to do with animals, and they've told me I've got to get a 5, that's a strong reason because they really want to work with animals. So they might not need the maths after that starting point, but we just need to get them through the tick box to get them in. So I think if you know that about a student, you find out their why, you can remind them of it when things are getting stressful. You can remind them of it when they're feeling a bit unmotivated or miserable because it's all too much. I think we can help them remember why. As we go through the journey, for me, I definitely increase the exam focus all as I go through. And obviously by this stage now, which where we are really is the final stage, it becomes more urgent, it becomes more important. Okay, and I think at this point I'm very open with them, and those students that aren't doing enough now, I would definitely be pushing them in that direction, saying, come on, you're leaving it too late now. It's literally a few weeks. So at the bottom I put exam technique always present but increasingly explicit. I'm assuming that's going to be the same for every subject, but I appreciate I may be wrong on that. For me, whenever I tutor, whenever I teach, I always try and drop exam technique in right from the beginning. Even if I was teaching someone in year 7, I might not be talking quite as openly about GCSEs, but sometimes I'll say things like, when you do GCSE, this topic's in there. It gets a bit harder, but it's in there. And if you remember to write this down, it helps you in a GCSE. So I try to link it all the way through the journey so that it becomes normal. That exam technique, writing down what they've done, putting on paper what's on their calculator. Sorry if you're English or something, so obviously my conversation is all maths. But that exam technique, if I build it into its normal, it's not a shock to them. It's not something new just at the end that they have to learn ready for the exams. It's just part of it. Okay, so I was going to talk about a couple of students. The names are changed. The names I use actually are my niece and nephew. So they don't know this about really, but I use them all the time because it means I'm not trying to think of students that I'm not going to accidentally talk about another student. Okay, so I'm sure if you have a look at the information I put about Sophie, you'll recognise this student. She wants to do well. She finds it difficult. She loves school. She's happy to work hard, but she's stressed by exams. She panics at the mention of exam papers. She's anxious, and she's often disappointed by the results she gets because she wants to do so much better. Okay. This is a real student, obviously with a different name, and she came to me and she was literally working so hard but had no confidence. She was getting about a grade 4 at the time, and she wanted to get a 6 or 7. It was a big step away because of the anxiety and because of how she felt. Every time she sat an exam paper, it's like she froze and couldn't do anything. So one of the biggest things I realised was that beyond anything, forget about what maths she needed to know. We needed to get to the point where she could see an exam booklet and not go into meltdown and panic, because at that point, she couldn't actually even start the exam. And literally she'd sit there sometimes and do very little. So I realised it's something I'd never done before. I realised I needed to almost numb her to seeing what looked like an exam paper. And I hadn't done it before. I now do it with quite a few students if they're anxious. I literally printed out loads of front covers to exam papers, and whatever I did, I stapled it to the front, literally. So every single thing, if I did a worksheet, if we used a piece of blank paper to write something on, I always put an exam paper on the front of it. It's a lot of printing, but it actually worked. I did it as a bit of a trial because I didn't know what to do. It's like, how can I get to the point where I can stop her panicking as soon as she sees it? And it literally worked. And I've done it with another student, a boy called Max. He also had the same problem, would go into meltdown. And he now also, he can just do exam papers now. He may not pass this year, but he literally now he's no longer stressed and anxious. He's at least now able to access the paper and do what he can. So I think that was quite a good strategy. The other things I worked on with Sophie, I basically focused a huge amount on confidence. I really focused on the positive. I focused on every single small win. So if she got 1 mark different than normal, if she got something right that she got wrong, we celebrated it like she just got 100%. And literally, we had stickers, we had everything that made her happy, but we celebrated literally the tiniest wins. And I couldn't have been more positive. At times, it was like almost difficult to be so positive. You had to kind of overdo the positivity, but in a genuine way, which is actually quite a skill I've learned. And it really worked for her, because once she started to have that little bit of belief that maybe she could do that, and maybe she could get 1 more mark, suddenly it didn't become quite such a big pressure on her. And that constant reassurance and literally kind of celebrating every small win really made a difference. And she started to gradually realise that she only needed to worry about the 1 next mark. We stopped thinking about how many marks she needed to get overall, and we were literally like, can we get 1 more? Can we get 1 more? And it breaks it down to something that's achievable. And I think for her, that really, really helped. Okay. The other thing with her, I'm going to talk more about parents afterwards, but with Sophie, her parents, they were worried, but also nothing she did was ever going to be enough. And that added to her pressure. So she was putting pressure on herself. And then she also had pressure from the parents. And her parents only saw an improvement if the grade changed. Now, we all know in like GCSE level or A-level level, a mark here and there is not going to change a grade straight away. It's as you build up. I know Claire just put something about 17 more marks. I didn't see the rest of it yet, Claire. But basically, those marks coming up, the parent didn't see that small change as a progress. So my job on top of working with Sophie was to actually educate the parents, say, look, you've got to start celebrating those wins, because she's not going to make the progress you want unless you start helping her with the positivity and the confidence. And that in itself was a separate conversation. And I'd have those conversations, not with her listening. I'd have them after the session, outside or on the phone. I'd phone them on a different day when she wasn't there. And we'd have those conversations. And it really did help. But obviously, it is hard work. You know, I'm not going to pretend it wasn't hard work. It was hard work. Okay, I had another student, Tom, who isn't my nephew, but he wasn't my real student, but Tom's my nephew. He was the opposite. He was laid back. He was easygoing. He had this absolute belief everything was fine. He thinks he was working hard. He wasn't. And he had total faith that he would do well no matter what happened. And he didn't like to be given advice. He became disengaged because, you know, he was going to do well. Why did he need to listen? And I'm sure we've all seen this child. They're like the two extremes. Okay. And with Tom, it had to be slightly different. I had to look at what I could do to make him understand that whilst he was doing okay, it wasn't going to be as good as he thought because he wasn't doing enough. And I had to be a little bit more brutal, I guess, not nasty, but I had to be a bit more direct, and I had to be a bit more, not, I don't want to say nasty, but I had to kind of tell him as it was and say, actually, what do you want to get? Okay, you want to get a grade, say you wanted to get a grade 8. At the moment, if you carry on, you're going to get a grade 6 because you're not doing enough, because you're not doing this, because you're not doing that. You're good enough to get a grade 8, but only if you start to do something about it. And I had to give him very clear instructions. I had to give him structure. I had to literally explicitly say, by next time I see you, you need to have done this. You need to be doing this. We talked about his lessons in school, and he was clearly not being great in lessons. He wasn't working particularly hard. He wasn't really behaving very well. And I ended up having to explain to him that my 1 hour a week was not going to make the difference if he spent 5 hours a week in school doing nothing. And I had to really kind of help him to understand that if he wasn't going to be consistent, he wasn't going to achieve what he needed to achieve, and he wasn't going to get what he wanted despite believing he could. Okay? I had to be positive but firm, and I had to put the accountability onto him. And I literally, he was someone I would literally say to him at the start of every lesson, so, okay, so what have you done since I last saw you? You've got an assessment coming up. What revision have you done? How many hours have you done? What topics have you done? Tell me exactly how you did it. And we quickly unpicked that he really wasn't doing any. So then I started to direct more and more. The parents also were interesting with Tom because they were stressing about the fact he wasn't achieving the best he could, but they weren't willing to challenge him because they didn't want the argument. And he was a child that would have argued with them about it because he didn't want to be told. So we had to work kind of as two. We had to work together. We had to have the same message, but I had to support them in understanding the sort of things I was saying so that they would reinforce it as well, because they didn't really know what they wanted to say other than the fact they were worried he wouldn't achieve. So I don't know whether, I'm guessing you've all seen both of those children and many others. Okay, I'm sure you've all seen those students, and I'm sure you've also got lots of strategies. If we've got time at the end, I will go back to it and ask for other people's strategies, but I'm conscious of if I get through everything I've planned, and then depending on timescales, if there's time, we'll go back and, you know, share other strategies, and also look, I know there's stuff in the chat, which I think is likely to be some strategies as well. Okay, so what I've worked out, and again, this is my thoughts, you may agree, you may have slightly different ones. I think students probably need more structure than we appreciate. I think they need things to be clear. I think the confidence and emotional support is massive, and I think not only for the really obviously anxious students, I think you can get students that are relatively confident on the face of it, but they still have those moments of doubt. They doubt what they're doing, they doubt whether they're right, and they have that moment of saying, well, I've got this as my answer. Is it right? And in an exam, they have to have the confidence to go, actually, yeah, I think this is right. I've got it. I believe that it's really important for us as tutors to actually teach them those strategies, help them what to do when they're stuck. How do they address it? What? And obviously for different subjects, it's going to be different. But, you know, you're stuck on a question. What's your thought process going to be? Well, what could we think about? What could we consider? What do we recognise? Which words do we know? Anything that might help us to find a way in. And then if you get really stuck and potentially stressed, how do we recover from it? One thing I have noticed, I've put here, beware of your reactions and your subtle signals. What I realised quite quickly is that certain students, when they were working out a question, they'd come up with an answer. They'd either write it down or say it, and then they'd look at me. And I'd suddenly realised they were looking at me for the reassurance, even if I didn't respond. And it was literally my eyes might move, or my head might move, or I might make a face that was kind of like, oh, that's not right. And I didn't realise I was doing it until I realised how much they were relying on it. And it was those subtle signals I was giving them. And I basically learned and kind of realised that in that one-to-one particularly environment, they read more from you than you could ever imagine. Okay. And I've learned now, I actively, especially as we get closer to the exams, and I'm trying to get them to be, less reliant on checking with me, I now actively look away, I look down, and I tell them I'm doing it so they don't think I'm being weird. I literally will say things like, I'm deliberately not looking at you because I know you're looking for a reaction from me. And I'll actively talk about it so they know, and I'll tell the parents if the parents are around as well. So, no one thinks I'm doing weird things. Sometimes I'll sit and do a maths question to stop me looking at them. I'll find things to make sure I don't give them those reactions. The other thing I did work out, again, with certain students, linking to that actually, when they do get stuck in exams and they kind of have that moment of doubt of whether they're right, one of the things I talk to some of my one-to-one students about is, okay, so if you're that stuck, imagine you're sitting here with me. Imagine you're sitting in the kitchen. Imagine you're sitting in, in the school library, wherever we might be, and think about what I would do in reaction to your question now. What face would I make? Would my eyes move? What sound might I make? Would I kind of make a subtle gasp or something? And literally kind of ask them to think back to those sessions whilst they're in the exam, and so they can kind of go, right, what would she do? And that often was enough. It made them laugh, but that wasn't why I would have said it. The reason I said it was because it gave them something to think about. They usually got it right, and they had to commit to an answer. So actually, me giving them something to kind of think about, looking, what would I do? How would I react? If nothing else, it usually was enough to make them then just go, well, actually, I think she'd be okay. She'd probably laugh or smile or whatever, and then they put it down. And it definitely did. It did work for certain students, particularly really, really well. I saw one student after the exams a few weeks later, and he literally said, I spent quite a lot of time thinking about what you'd be doing as I was doing questions, and it made me write my answers down. So even though it might not have been the right answers, at least it made him put something on paper. So, we're going in the right direction. The other thing I do think is important with what students need is telling them to do more work or revise more, which is, a lot of us have done it. Schools do it, we do it. It's not necessarily enough. They need to know more than that. More work doesn't mean much. Revise more doesn't mean much. For those students that are stuck and unsure, they need that structure. They need suggestions. They need ideas. So obviously, we all do things slightly differently. I think the key thing with preparing students for exams is that it can still be enjoyable. We can still, you can smile, you can laugh, you can have fun, you could play games, you can do a variety of activities. I've said avoid endless past papers with no structure to their use. Now, I'm all in favour of past papers. I like them a lot, but I also think students become obsessed about them towards the exams, and they literally just do past paper after past paper. Definitely maths, and I don't know how it fits with other subjects so much, but in maths, they'll do a past paper. Sometimes they don't even mark it, and then they move on to another one, and they're really happy because they're doing past paper, past paper. I've done 10 past papers since I saw you. But at no point have they checked whether those past papers are having any impact. At no point have they checked whether they're doing them right. At no point have they kind of thought, well, what am I doing it for? Other than to say, oh, I got 20 out of 30 or whatever they've done. So I think I would encourage avoiding that, but if nothing else, show them how to use them well, okay? Because you can use past papers really effectively. And I'm pretty sure that's on my next slide. So in terms of like teaching revision and using assessments, I think it's really important to make the conversation about revision normal. It should be all year, yeah, and like all the way back to year 7. Talk about it as a small thing. Just keep doing it. Small, consistent habits are much more effective than doing a big block of revision at the last minute, okay? I think as tutors, it's really important that we model strategies. So if for your subject there's a certain way of revising that works really well, don't assume they know how to do it. Model it, show them how to do it, show them how you would do it, and so they can adapt what you've done. I would share resources with them. And I don't mean you have to share all your personal resources. I mean things like show them where the good websites are. So like there's a few maths websites, some are better than others. And I would always say, have you seen this one yet? if you go on here, and I'd literally give them a little tour and show them the best bits for them to use in their revision as they get closer and closer to the exams. I've put school tests and past papers. What I mean with that is that their school tests that they've done in the exam conditions can be really helpful if you can get hold of them. I know schools often don't let them come home, especially in year 11 now after COVID, but if they can get photos of the tests so you can see where they've gone wrong, you can show them how to use them and past papers to identify gaps in sort of subject knowledge, gaps in content, but also exam technique issues, because they might be doing really, really well, but losing so many marks because their exam technique isn't very good and they're not writing down what needs to be written. They're missing something out that's crucial in terms of gaining the marks. And I think we can use those tests and past papers to teach students how to learn from mistakes. So I think it's getting them to understand how they can use it as well, because they only see you for maybe 1 hour a week. They've got the rest of the week to do other work. So I think that's important. Claire, I've managed to get some scans from some schools as well. That does work sometimes. And the other thing I do ask is I say to the students, if they're allowed to, just try and get photos of the pages immediately. Some schools, again, some schools let them, some schools don't. So it just depends a little bit on the school. Just trying to see how much I've got left, quite a lot. I'll try and go a bit quicker. So I think from perspective, we've talked about students. If we think about parents, I think parents in the year 11, particularly, or year 12 and 13, sorry, they often don't really know what it involves if they haven't been through it before. They don't understand the current exam systems. They don't understand the structures of the GCSEs, particularly because it's changed. And I think parents either they worry about putting too much pressure on the child, so they take it quite easy, or they do the opposite and they put so much pressure on it, it's just way too much. So I think we can help parents with that. And there's two types of school. And again, you probably all come across this, but you've got the really supportive schools, really good communication, lots of information for parents and help parents to understand what's going on and what should be expected. And then you've got the schools that aren't so good. They don't give parents information, or they may be good at giving the information, but the parents don't then engage with the schools for whatever reason. And I think parents often struggle to communicate with schools, and this is a big one for me. There might be a problem, but the parents don't know how to go in and speak to the school. They don't know what to ask. They don't know how to do it in such a way that won't make the situation worse, which sometimes it can. So we can help parents. We can guide them. We can reassure them. We can help to clarify things. So we can give them information about how the exam works. We can give them, there are 3 maths papers, 2 are calculators. Some parents don't know that information. So we can give them that basic information that makes it feel less stressful. I think we always need to be honest, but I think it's important to stay calm. So don't increase their panic. Don't add to their panic. So I know I've got students where, are they going to get the grade the parents want to? Possibly not. I've got to be honest and say to parent, actually at the moment they're on target more for a 3, but we've got to look at the steps forward. We've still got time. This is what your child needs to do. This is what I'm going to do with them. This is what you can do with them, and almost give them strategies to help, give them suggestions of what we can do rather than kind of just add to the panic and potentially make more stress. And I think we should always give a reason and an action and give them that understanding of what needs to happen. Okay. This is a big one for me, helping parents communicate with school. Now, I know, having been in school, that sometimes parents communicate with you in school in such a way that is really tricky. And you can get emails from some parents when you end up thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even want to reply to that. I don't want to open it. And it can be really difficult. Now, I know I left school and started working with a family who had 2 parents who were exactly those people. From a school perspective, they were really difficult. And you almost see their name pop up on your email inbox and think, oh no, what's wrong now? And actually, when I started working with them on a sort of tutoring basis, and I'd go to their house, I realised that what I saw in those emails wasn't actually what was really going on. But what they didn't know was how to put it in such a way to help us understand. So I know now that those parents were really stressed. And they were really worried, and they didn't feel enough was being done to support their child and things like that. But the way they wrote the emails was very confrontational, very negative at the staff and at the school, and it made it really hard to respond to without that emotional involvement. You can't help yourself occasionally going, oh my gosh. And I think as a tutor I can really help them, and I did help those 2 parents once I was not in school. When I realized what they wanted to find out, I would talk them through the types of questions to ask. I'd tell them who to try and contact, not necessarily which individual, but actually what role does the person need to have in the school to be able to help them best, depending on what it was. I'd help them know if it's worth escalating. So actually, if they weren't getting an answer from a maths teacher and they were desperate for some information, then they could try the head of maths, but not to go straight to the head of maths, start with the teacher and kind of help them do it in such a way that it was diplomatic and they were hopefully going to get back the response that they wanted. And I think I've probably spent a lot of time doing that with a few parents, and I think I've learned a lot from it, and I think I've realised why they get so stressed. And I think it's worth, if you've got the understanding of the schools. Now, obviously, it depends if you've worked in school, but if you know how the school works and you kind of can see what they need to do or the questions they need to ask and things, I think it's really good to spend that time with the parent if you can. I don't think we should put ourselves under huge extra workload, but if you can make it fit and you can help them from a parent perspective, I think, you know, they see you as such an important part of the journey for them. And I think it really helps in terms of their loyalty to you, and they value what you've done for them. Okay, but going back to what I said before, I still think school comes first and we support. So I think I would always try and encourage, like I've got these two parents, I literally would say things to them like, I'd write it slightly differently than that, because if you write that, this is likely to be the response you get. However, if you went kind of round this way and asked this and then asked this and suggested this, I think you're going to get what you need. And I think that helped because I was supporting rather than saying, no, the school's not doing enough. Because if I'd done that, all I'd have done was add to the confrontation and actually made the situation worse for everyone. So I think if you're able to do it, just remember, always think school first, and we support them. We support the student, we support the parent, we don't undermine the school. So again, these are my opinions, but common tutor mistakes in the exam year. I think it can be easy to focus too much on content and stress about the content. I know I've done it occasionally. You have those students that are worried about, I don't know, quadratic equations. They want to spend 6 weeks looking at quadratic equations. And you get to the point where you've wasted a lot of time trying to get them marks from other things because that's all they want to do. And I think it's important that we don't forget about exam strategy, exam technique, and basically adding that in. I also think a lot of tutors not intentionally overload their students. So I think we've got to always remember schools give homework. Some schools give a lot of homework. Some schools do a lot of assessments. And we've got to remember that that always has to come first. We can add the layer on the cake. We're the icing on the top. We're doing the extra bits. We're helping them with the bits they're not sure about. But there's no point in us giving lots of homework and then the student getting into trouble for not doing their school homework. So I think it's important, despite some parents wanting lots of homework, I think we've got to be realistic about what's enough and what's too much. And we've got to be mindful of overloading. Okay. I think another mistake is to give vague feedback, be it to the student or to the parent, and it doesn't necessarily support progress. So I think the more explicit you can be and say, actually, you need to practice exactly this, or go and practice this from this website, or go and do these 3 questions. I think the more we can help to support progress, rather than just kind of saying, I'll go and practice a bit more work on algebra, which, you know, it'd be very easy to say, it means nothing to anyone really. I think some tutors also, and I understand why, can ignore the parents. And I think it's easy to be a bit scared of parents sometimes. I've talked about a few that I work with, but definitely I've seen both sides. And I understand that they can, you know, some parents can be hard work, but I think the key is they are wanting the best for their child. And I think we're wanting the best for their child. So if we all work together as a team, that's when we're going to get the best results. Okay. And if the reality is, if you have a parent that's really, really difficult, then maybe actually it's the wrong tutoring relationship. And you've got to look after yourself as well. If you can't work with them because it's hard, then maybe it's not the right mix. Okay. I know I've said it a few times already, but I think some tutors will undermine what the school has said, and I don't think it's necessarily intentional, but you have to be really careful. Just try and be diplomatic. If you think a school's got it wrong, I'm teaching a student this year who was working on higher GCSE all year, and from the very beginning when I picked him up, I didn't really understand why, because he was never going to achieve a grade 5 even. He'd be lucky to get a 4. And on the GCSE higher, he couldn't even access the paper, but that's what the school was doing. And everything in me was like, the school has got this wrong for this child, but I couldn't say that directly to the parent. So what I did do, I had conversations like, has there been any conversation yet about whether the school is going to choose higher or foundation? Because at some point they'll make a final decision. Has that come up yet? And it hadn't. And I said, oh, at some point that might come up, because obviously as you get closer, the grades become a bit clearer. And then at that point, you might have that conversation with the school, and the school will guide you what they think's best, blah, blah, blah. And I said things like this. And eventually it got to the point where the school did have that conversation after Christmas. And the mum then said to me, do you agree that he should be doing foundation based on what the school have just said? And I was like, yes, I do. That's why I've been kind of talking about the fact it might come up. And I think it's important we now focus. But I didn't say the school was wrong, because actually different schools make their decision at different times for different reasons. And I think it's just, I'm very pro supporting the school, but trying to help the parent find their way around it rather than creating negativity, which I don't think helps anybody. So when students don't engage, I think I've almost finished. I think I've only got a couple more pages, so please bear with me. If they don't engage, I think it's important to try and understand why, especially at this point now. Sometimes the stress gets high, the pressure gets high, and actually there's often working too hard. You get classic groups of students in school, if you watch them, they all work too hard and they all put each other under more pressure, and they all say, I'm doing this, and then gradually it gets out of control. So sometimes that's enough to stop them engaging. I think if you look at your sessions, I know I do it sometimes, I think this child's not really motivated. What is it? Can I change what I'm doing? Is it boring? You know, am I focusing too much on exam questions now? What could I do differently? Should we play a game? You know, even though they're going towards the exams, you can still find games and Kahoots and things like that that are relevant and interesting. Okay. Do they need nurturing? Do they need positivity? Do they need firmer encouragement? Depends on the child. And again, I would liaise with the parents on this, especially if it was the firmer encouragement. If they're needing a little bit of a gentle kind of boot up the backside in the nicest sense, I would probably have that conversation with the parent first and just see if there's anything going on. And remind them why the exams matter. Remind them about why they need it, because sometimes that can just be enough to re-engage. And then strategies for the final weeks. There's no rocket science here. I would just shift the focus, really focus on exam technique, timing, and building their confidence and just convincing them they can do it. And then things, high impact actions, I think, always give them the next steps. Help them to know what to do next. Always tell them why, and always link it back to the exam. At this point, everything should link back and say, if you do this, this will help you with this. If you do this, you're a bit stuck on this, so let's go and practice this because this will help this. And sometimes that's all they need, that reminder and that just that help to know what they need to do, especially if stress is rising. And then I do think exam success is not just about knowledge. It's not just about content. The confidence, the structure, the communication and support, all of those things make exams successful. And I do think we as tutors have that luxury of playing a vital role in all of these for the parent and the student. And I think both, it just really helps. And I think we're so lucky to be able to make that difference in the way that we do. Yeah, and everyone, we're all doing a great job. Don't forget that, because it's easy to forget when it gets busy and stressful at this point. You kind of get lost in the kind of the squash of all the work. Don't forget how much impact you can have and are having every day when you're working with these students. And I'm sure that is the end of what I was going to talk about. Now, I know there's been loads coming up in the chat. So please do, obviously, if you'd like to get in touch or kind of make contact with me, that's all my information there. I'd love to hear from people and obviously make contact, join up on LinkedIn and things like that. So please feel free to follow. So probably the best thing, Sam, have you been following the chat? Is there anything jumping out, or
yeah, I think from Rebecca's question, the most recent question is probably the first we can answer. So she says, Julia, I wonder whether you have any reflections on how best to communicate with parents who seem reluctant to discuss their child's progress. One of my clients is like this at the moment. It's so vanishingly rare for obvious reasons, and I'm curious how other tutors would approach this and how that compares with my own approach so far.
Okay, so I think I agree. It doesn't happen that often, but you get those parents that it's almost like they're not interested. I think sometimes they've done their job by connecting you as a tutor with the child. I don't know. I mean, I would personally, if they're reluctant to discuss it, I think it would depend whether I had any major concerns. If I was quite happy with how things were sort of ticking along, I would just keep on giving them positive feedback and keep on sending. I send feedback after every session if it's online, and if I see them face to face, I have that conversation. I would just, if I was happy with how things are going, I'd just be positive and keep telling them all the positives. If I was worried about how they were progressing and I was concerned, I think obviously if they're reluctant, they're not necessarily going to be available to you as easily as someone else. I would probably try and arrange a phone call and actually say, I've got, I just want to talk through a few things with you. I'd like to talk about, and I'd probably send an email saying I'd like to talk about this, this, and this. And I think they're either going to be open to that or they're not. There's a certain point, if they're not open to having those conversations, there's a point when there's not much you can do, in my opinion. But I mean, I don't know if anyone else has got an opinion on that, because there's lots of very experienced tutors sitting in this room at the moment. So if anyone else has got an opinion, please obviously feel free to mute and join in there. I was just looking at what else. So Arthur's obviously given an opinion there, which makes sense too. Yeah. I'm just running through, see if there's anything else.
I scrolled up already. Does anybody else have any other questions for Julia before we wrap up?
Julia, question.
Yeah.
What do you do? I'm just thinking pure kind of exam season here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do anything different, like the night of before exams? So I do like night before cramming sessions. I'm not a big fan of cramming, but like literally a 45-minute session the night before an exam. I'm just wondering if you do anything, how you change your schedule in kind of exam week. So I'm like maths exam the 13th, Wednesday the 13th, day before the first GCSE. Are you doing anything differently that day?
Yeah, so basically I'll do the same as you. I'll definitely put on a cramming type thing in the evening. I'm going to be honest, I've got some students that will come to me, so I will tend to keep that day as free as possible. Oh, I've got all sorts of interference coming back. But I would keep that day free, and I would offer one-to-ones to the students where I know that wouldn't work. And I've got some special needs students that I would prioritise, and I would ask their parents to book something in so I can maybe see them today, so they've got it as refreshed as possible. It'd be that classic cram. This, just do this. That sounding's really weird. I don't know if it's just me that can hear it, so I'm not hoping you can actually hear what I'm saying.
Yeah, because I found a lot less schools are doing study leave now, like rightly so. I think if you're working in schools, like study leave isn't a great idea. But I used to, a couple of years ago, I would have students who were on study leave,
yeah,
and I would just fill that day with them, but they're not doing that now. So that's why I've kind of moved more to kind of that in the evening. I call it a cram session for IGCSE, for GCSE, for high and foundation.
Yeah.
And I say to those students, I don't do it like a normal group session. I very much do this is a cramming session. I'm going to throw stuff. Yeah, bang, 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 bang. Yeah. So if you're maybe a nervous, anxious student, if you want to join with your camera off and be muted the whole time, that's cool with me for that style of session. So just sounds like you're doing
the same, pretty much identical, to be honest. I literally do the same. If they don't want cameras on, it doesn't matter. I don't need to see if they understand. All I'm trying to do is draw all that information at them the night before to try and make sure it's just in there. Because I'm that person, I don't remember anything before. So you know the ones that you need to learn, I would have to learn them the night before. So I tend to throw that stuff at them and say, don't forget this, don't forget that, because I know I would forget. I know that was my important for me when I did exams. So I do things like that and like go through the basics of any algebra, depending what focus it is, depending on the group. But yeah, much the same as you've just said. Anyone else?
Great. If there's no more questions then, thank you so much everybody for coming this morning. Thank you so much, Julia, for leading the session for us as well. For everybody who has joined live and who has watched the entire session, I will send you an email shortly within the next couple of days. It will have both the recording link and the link to get your certificate. And if you are watching this on YouTube at a later date, you are able to register for our sessions. And then as long as you're watching it live, you will also get a CPD certificate as well. I did just see, sorry, your name flashed up really quickly. Anvita, it began with an A. Let me find the list of people that you had a question. Oh, they've gone.
I think she was leaving rather than asking the question, actually.
Oh, they put their hand up. Okay, that's fine.
Hang on, no, there is. I do an ask me anything session the night before for students, even if it's just go through their nerves and stress. And then some of them, I do a full mock exam with them a week or two before on video link where they can ask me questions within it, and they're more nervous for this, that it gets rid of the nerves for the actual exam. And then when going wrong in their actual exam, they then hear my voice in their head during the exam, which helps them. Yeah, that makes sense. So that kind of just that couple of weeks before going through stuff and being able to ask questions and remember.
Great. Right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.